In 1857, a 6-year-old boy in rural Vermont began whispering words no one could understand, words no child should know. Doctors refused to diagnose him. The town abandoned him. And what followed has never been explained, not by science, not by faith, not even by time. Because the boy didn't get sick. He changed. And what he became was never meant to be human. Tonight, we open a journal no one was meant to read. We play the tape that should never have survived. I was born in the town of Grantham, Vermont, in the winter of 1829, a quiet place nestled between frostbitten hills and pine forests, so thick they whispered to each other when the wind passed through. It was the kind of town where nothing ever happened, where news came by horse weeks late, and the dead were buried in silence without fanfare. I left Grantham in my youth and promised never to return, but some promises rot in the ground long before we do. It was January of 1857 when the letter arrived. Yellowed paper, trembling ink, a plea scrawled in my sister's hand. Come quickly. It's Elias. Something is wrong with him, and the doctors won't come back. That was all. No, please. No love. Just a name, a warning, and enough fear in the jagged loops of her penmanship to chill my blood. I hadn't seen Clara in nearly a decade. Not since I left the town behind after Father's passing, vowing to carve out a different life in Concord. But there's something about family that pulls you back like a hook under the skin. I packed a trunk, boarded a snow-slick coach, and began the long, rattling journey to the White Mountains toward the place I had spent years trying to forget. Grantham looked the same, yet older. The buildings sagged under the weight of snow and silence. The trees pressed closer now, like they crept a few feet forward in my absence. Pines that once lined the hills now loomed near the fences and porches, muttering their green secrets in the wind. Clara greeted me on the porch, her figure barely more than a silhouette in the falling snow. She looked thinner, her hair streaked with gray, eyes sunken as though something inside her had been quietly siphoning life away. She didn't smile when she saw me. He hasn't spoken your name, she said instead of hello. Elias. I asked. She didn't answer, just turned and walked inside. The house smelled of damp wood and old iron. The parlor had been stripped of furniture, save for a rocking chair and a fireplace where logs smoldered but never flamed. The warmth didn't reach the corners of the room, or the corners of my bones. Where is he? I asked. Clara looked toward the stairs. Up there, but he doesn't come down anymore. The boy had only just turned 6. I remember when she brought him into town in swaddling cloth, a quiet child with impossibly pale eyes. He never cried, not once. The townsfolk said that was a blessing. But I remember the way old Mr. Calhoun muttered that silence was the mark of something that listens more than it breathes. That night, I heard it for the first time, the whispering from the pines. It came just before dawn, a low rustling like the hush of voices moving through a congregation of needles. Not wind. Wind howls and groans. This was closer to a murmur, secretive, patient. I rose from bed and crossed the frosted window. The trees outside swayed gently, though the sky was still and the snow unbroken. Shadows moved between the trunks, but when I squinted, they were gone. Then came a sound above me. Not footsteps, not quite, a dragging, like bare feet across floorboards. I crept up the stairs toward the attic where Elias stayed. Clara hadn't gone near it since his condition began. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of things moving when they shouldn't. 3 weeks of candles refusing to stay lit. I reached the top step and paused. A low humming came from the other side of the attic door. Childlike, but off somehow. Too slow, like the notes had been drawn out and twisted until they lost their shape. I knocked. The humming stopped. Elias. I whispered. It's your uncle. May I come in? No response. I tried the door. It was locked. Heavy chains wound through the handle, affixed to a bolt Clara must have installed herself. Just above it, etched into the wood, was something that turned my stomach. A ring of symbols I didn't recognize. Scratched deep, crude and erratic. Symbols that didn't belong to any language I'd ever seen. Behind the door, the boy began humming again, softer this time. I stepped back and descended the stairs, not realizing I'd been holding my breath until I reached the bottom and released it in a long, trembling sigh. Clara was waiting in the kitchen, hunched over a steaming mug of chicory. "He's not sick," she said. "I don't think he ever was." I waited. "Something came to him," she whispered. "In the trees. That's where it started." I remembered the sound in the night, the murmurs from the pines, the sense that something in the forest was awake and listening. "You should read the doctor's letter," Clara added, before he left. She slid it across the table. Shaky handwriting, like it had been written by someone with one foot already in the grave. I saw things in that boy's eyes no child should carry, things that stare back. "I will not return." I advised burning the room and never speaking of what was inside it. Clara told me the last time Elias had truly slept was the third night after the snow came. Before that, he was like any other child, quiet but curious, fond of cardinals and bits of song, quick to hide behind his mother's skirts when visitors came. Then came the fever, a low, pulsing heat behind the eyes, she said. He started waking in the night, standing beside her bed with his hands clasped, muttering nonsense in a whispery voice that made her teeth itch. She tried to soothe him with old lullabies, lavender oil, holy water. Nothing worked. By the fourth night, he had stopped sleeping altogether. "I hear him moving at all hours," she said to me, voice flat from exhaustion, pacing, humming, talking to himself, or to something else, something I can't see. The boy's eyes, she said, had changed. Still pale, yes, but glassy now, unblinking, as though sleep no longer existed in his world. The color had leached from his skin, veins more visible than before. Sometimes he sat cross-legged in the attic corner for hours, drawing on the floor with soot and chalk. When she cleaned it away, the symbols returned. It wasn't just the insomnia. It was everything else. "He doesn't eat," Clara whispered. "He mimics the motions but never swallows." I found bits of bread tucked on the floorboards, unchewed. I found myself staring at the ceiling beams above us, listening. "He hasn't blinked in over a day," she added. It felt impossible, but so did everything else since I arrived. That evening, I sat alone by the fire, rereading the doctor's letter. The words seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. That part, things that stare back, stuck in my mind like a thorn I couldn't reach. The house groaned in the cold. The shadows pressed against the windows. And above me, soft footsteps began to move across the attic floor. No child's pace, but something deliberate and slow. I stood. My legs shook. I climbed the stairs again, lantern in hand, stopping just short of the attic door. "Elias," I said, voice low. No answer. The air around the door was cold. Not winter cold, but dead cold. Emptied of heat entirely, as though something had pulled the life from it. I pressed my ear to the wood. There was a sound, not humming this time, a rhythmic, wet clicking. I didn't recognize it. That night, I didn't sleep either. Clara gave me her journal the next morning, not as a gift, but as a confession. "I've written everything," she said, "from the first night. I thought it might help to make sense of it all, but it doesn't. The entries were neat at first, observational, a mother's careful record of her son's strange illness. Then the handwriting changed, sharper angles, erratic spacing, as though the words had been dragged from her. December 19th. He stood at the foot of my bed and whispered in a voice not his own. December 21st. The language sounds wet. I've never heard anything like it. I don't think it's from here. December 23rd. I caught him staring at the corner again. Nothing there, but his eyes so wide, like he was watching something crawl across the ceiling. December 26th. He told me, "The roots are listening." The last entry read, January 3rd. He began repeating a phrase, over and over. I don't know what it means. I don't think anyone does. Elias Hargrove. Elias Hargrove. Elias Hargrove. I read it aloud without thinking. And then, somewhere upstairs, Elias began laughing. It wasn't a child's laugh. That was the first time I truly felt afraid of him. Later that day, I convinced Clara to let me see him face to face. I'll speak to him, I said. I need to understand what's happening. Maybe if he hears a voice from before. She hesitated, then nodded. We removed the chain and opened the attic door together. The smell hit me first, earthy, wet, and wrong, like mushrooms growing in a crypt. The air was thick, and the walls were lined with drawings, hundreds of them, charcoal on wood, overlapping in tangled chaos. The same symbol repeated in different shapes, and I formed a twisted roots, always watching. Elias sat in the far corner, knees tucked to chest, staring at nothing. "Elias," I said gently. He blinked. His mouth opened slowly as if amused. "You shouldn't have said the words," he whispered. My skin prickled. "What words?" "The ones that call it. The name that is a name." I glanced at Clara, but she looked too pale to speak. "Elias," I said, stepping closer, "do you know who I am?" He turned his head slightly, then smiled, not with joy, but with recognition laced in something older. "You were here before," he said, "when the trees were new." "What do you mean?" But he only closed his eyes and began to whisper again, the same phrase, over and over. "Elias Hargrove, Elias Hargrove, Elias Hargrove." I had known Dr. Pembroke since I was a child. He was a man of science first and faith second, with a gentle demeanor and a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose whenever he was troubled. The town trusted him, and so did Clara. When Elias first began showing signs, before the whispering, before the drawings, before the hunger stopped, Pembroke was the first to be called. He arrived just before dusk, cloaked against the cold, his spectacles already fogging in the warmth of the house. Clara explained the symptoms, her voice thin and trembling. The doctor listened carefully, nodding, taking slow, deliberate notes. "He's been speaking in tongues?" he asked. "In something that sounds like one," Clara replied. Pembroke had brought along a younger apprentice, a wiry man named Fletcher with sharp eyes and a surgical bag that smelled of vinegar and steel. Together, they climbed the stairs while Clara and I waited below, her hands clutching a kerchief as if to wring the fear out of it. The silence was long and suffocating. Then we heard it, a low shout. Something heavy thudded to the attic floor, the creak of hurried footsteps. Fletcher came down first, pale and wide-eyed, muttering something about the smell of the eyes and how the boy had spoken to him in perfect Latin. Pembroke followed, slower, his face ashen, hands trembling. He should not know those words," he said quietly. "What did he say?" I asked. Pembroke wouldn't answer. "He refused examination," he added instead. "Not violently. Just," he stared at us, and we could not move. I felt as though my legs were rooted to the floor. Clara stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "There was something about the room," Pembroke said. "The air. It felt inverted. I've never encountered anything like it." That was all he would say. He returned the next day with a book, a Latin grammar, and asked to speak to Elias once more. I watched from the stairs as he tried to engage the boy in conversation. It lasted 5 minutes before the doctor staggered back, gasping for breath, clutching his throat. "There's something in him," he said hoarsely, "not possessing him, nested, like it belongs there." That was the last time Pembroke entered the house. The next morning, Fletcher left town. Pembroke took to his bed with a fever so sudden and violent that many believed he'd caught a winter plague. But I remember the look on his face as he came down the stairs, that brittle glaze in his eyes, like he'd seen the first cracks in his own mind. He sent a letter 2 days later, delivered by stable boy. It read, "I cannot return. The child is not afflicted in any way I recognize. His pulse was absent, yet he moved. His breath misted the air, yet I could not feel warm from his body. And those eyes, there is something ancient behind them. I advise distance. I fear what may happen if you continue to keep him there." He died 2 days after that. Clara told me his eyes had turned a strange gray before the end, as if the color had drained from his irises like ink washed from paper. Rumors began to spread in Grantham. The baker claimed he'd seen Elias walking outside at night, barefoot in the snow, unmoving, just watching the trees. A milkmaid whispered that her cows refused to walk past the Hargrove house now. One dropped dead in the lane when forced to. Even the vicar, Father Marin, stopped visiting. And Elias never came out of the attic again. The attic door was kept locked from that day on. Clara fixed a heavy iron bolt and wound thick chains through the latch. She claimed it was for his safety, but I saw the tremble in her hands when she did it. It wasn't for Elias. It was for us. The boy, if that's what he still was, no longer cried, no longer called for her. He remained behind that door without protest, pacing in slow circles or sitting perfectly still for hours at a time, waiting, watching. But for what? I tried to convince myself it was a fever of the mind, childhood hysteria, some strange affliction yet to be understood. But each day, the house sank deeper into something other. It wasn't just the chill or the darkness. It was a feeling, like the air grew thicker the longer you stayed, pressing down on your chest, making every breath feel borrowed. The sound above changed too, no longer just pacing. Now there were scratches, slow, deliberate scrapes along the wooden walls, taps at odd intervals, whispers that echoed from the beams like an infestation of voices too small to catch outright. I once climbed the stairs to listen closer, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. But as I pressed my ear to the wood, I heard a child's voice on the other side say, "I see you." I didn't go near the attic for 3 days after that. When I finally gathered the nerve to check again, I found a symbol carved into the door, deep, almost angry. It hadn't been there before. It resembled an eye, but misshapen, as though drawn by someone who had never seen one but had felt its gaze too long. I tried to scrub it away. The wood splintered beneath my brush, but the mark remained, stained into the grain. Inside, Elias had begun speaking in patterns. Not words, phrases, repeated in rhythm, chanted. Clara noted them in her journal. Sometimes the words rhymed in cruel little stanzas. Other times, they resembled prayers, twisted things that made no reference to God or heaven. Once, I heard him counting backward in perfect German. No one had taught him German. The drawings were worse. He used soot, crushed berries, chalk, whatever you find. When Clara checked on him through the small vent we'd fashioned for light and air, she found the attic walls covered in looping script that spiraled from floor to ceiling. Symbols of trees with mouths, roots entwined with human skulls, a tower of eyes peering from a pit that bled ink, and always the phrase, "Elias Hargrove." We asked the priest for help. He sent a letter back, claiming spiritual unrest was not his field. "The boy is beyond the parish," he wrote. "If what you say is true, his soul is not merely afflicted. It has been rewritten." By the 3rd week, the house began to change. Wood warped, windows stuck, nails rusted. Candles refused to stay lit near the attic stairwell. The shadows grew thicker, more stubborn. No matter how many lanterns we lit, the upper floor seemed swallowed by gloom. It felt as if the house itself was pulling away from the rest of the world, becoming a sealed thing. One morning, Clara found blood in the sink. Neither of us were injured. It hadn't come from our mouths or skin. We checked the roof. No sign of animal entry. But it was there, smeared beneath the faucet in long, dragging arcs like someone had tried to wash their hands and failed. Elias had not left the attic. I didn't sleep well after that. Dreams began to twist. I saw a version of the attic where the walls pulsed like lungs and Elias stood at the center, tall and thin, mouth open wide, a voice like cracking wood pouring from him in a tongue that tasted of copper and ash. I'd wake gasping, fingers clenched into mattress. Clara was worse. She'd started talking to herself, or to someone I couldn't see. She'd pause mid-sentence, tilt her head as if listening, and then answer in a whisper. When I asked who she was speaking to, she'd smile faintly and say, "Just the roots. They hum when they're happy." One night, I caught her placing a bowl of water and a small stone at the base of the attic stairs. When I asked why, she said, "He likes the offerings." He. Her eyes were vacant. The thing that speaks through him. It gets thirsty. We argued then. She slapped me when I suggested Elias be taken to a sanatorium in Montpelier. Her rage vanished as quickly as it came. Tears followed. He's all I have, she sobbed. But I don't think he's my son anymore. Neither did I. That night, just before the last candle died, I heard something behind the attic door. A sound I'll never forget. A second voice. Not Elias. Something lower. Heavier. It whispered words that made my bones ache. Words I couldn't remember after, only the shape of the fear they left behind. It started with the candles. One by one, they began to fail. At first, I blamed the drafts. This old house was full of them, and winter winds could trick even the steadiest flame. But no matter how carefully I shielded the light, no matter how tightly I closed the shutters or sealed the doors, the candles gutted out the moment I stepped too close to the attic stairs. Even oil lamps sputtered and died in that space. The darkness had grown selective. Clara noticed it, too. She stopped carrying candles altogether near Elias's room. "It prefers the dark now," she said, her voice barely more than breath. "I think it's learning how to stretch." I didn't ask what she meant. We tried keeping lights burning downstairs, dozens of candles lying along the walls, oil lanterns set on every surface. But each morning we awoke to find them snuffed, not burned through, just extinguished, their wicks still fat with wax, like something had passed through the rooms in the night and silenced each one with wet fingers. Then the shadows began to move. It was subtle at first, angles that seemed wrong, flickers at the edge of vision, corners that felt deeper than they were. But soon, there were moments when I'd see something dart along the wall, just out of reach, a flash of limb, a glimmer of eye, and always near the ceiling, always just above where I could comfortably look. I once saw Clara freeze in place, staring at the hallway mirror. "Do you see it?" she asked. I looked, nothing but our reflection. Then she pointed, not at us, but at the dark sliver just above our heads. "There," she whispered. "It's watching." That night, I bolted the attic door again. 2 locks, 3 by morning. I wasn't sure what I was trying to contain anymore. The neighbors began to notice. Mr. Holbrook, the old miller, passed by one morning on his sled and refused to look at the house. When I stepped outside to greet him, he flinched. "Don't speak to me, boy," he snapped. "Whatever's in there, keep it in there." Others were less subtle. The baker's wife claimed she saw figures in the windows at night. Not Elias. Others. Tall, motionless, pressed against the glass like they were waiting to be let in or out. Someone painted a mark on our door in ash, a crude X with a circle beneath it. I wiped it clean. The next night, it returned, this time carved into the wood. Clara stopped leaving the house. I still made trips for supplies. What little we needed now. The storekeeper would hand me items without a word, not meeting my gaze. The price was never spoken. No one asked questions anymore. Even the birds seemed to avoid us. I hadn't seen a crow or cardinal in days. The forest had grown silent. Inside, the cold was worse. Not the bite of winter, but something internal, a chill that seeped from the floorboards and into your marrow. I began to notice frost forming along the attic lock, even with the stove roaring. My breath fogged in every room now. Elias still hadn't spoken directly to me, but I heard him. Sometimes at night, when the wind was still and the fire had burned down low, I'd hear the sound of his bare feet padding across the attic floor, back and forth, always the same pattern. Other times, he'd speak in that low, rhythmic tone. Sometimes 2 voices answered. I kept Clara's journal close. She'd stopped writing entries, but I flipped through the old ones for clues, trying to understand what he was becoming. One page caught my eye again. When I lit a candle and held it to the door, the flame bent away, as though the dark was exhaling. I tried it myself. With trembling hands, I lit a taper and brought it close to the attic door. The flame arched away from the keyhole, its tip stretching backward as if repelled. The air was pulling, a subtle inhale that seemed to draw not just a flame, but me toward it. I blew it out and stepped back. Later that night, the boards creaked, not from Elias, but from the stairs below my room. I heard them groan beneath weight, slow and deliberate. Someone or something moving the dark. When I opened the door, nothing was there, except for the smell. Wet earth, rotting bark, and something faintly metallic, Old blood. I shut the door and pushed the armoire in front of it. By morning, 3 dead birds lay on the porch, their wings torn, their eyes missing. Father Marin arrived on the 9th day of January, wrapped in a thick woolen cloak and flanked by silence. He did not knock. Instead, he stood at the foot of the path for some time, staring up at the house with a gaze that did not blink, as though he were measuring the shadow it cast even in daylight. Clara opened the door, and I watched her expression harden into something unreadable. "You came," she said. The vicar gave a slow nod. There had been whispers. He carried no cross, no Bible, just a satchel that clinked faintly when he moved. He didn't remove his coat, nor did he warm himself by the fire. He stood in the parlor with his back to the hearth, staring up at the ceiling where the boards creaked softly above our heads. "I will not go near the boy," he said, before either of us could speak. "I am not here to perform rites or recite hollow comforts. That time is past." "Then why come at all?" I asked. He turned to me, to see if the roots have awakened. I thought him mad, but Clara only nodded as though she understood, as though some quiet pact had been made long ago. The vicar did not sleep that night. Instead, he wandered the perimeter of the house, muttering low prayers in a language I did not recognize. Latin, perhaps, but twisted, burdened with a weight that made my skin crawl. He paused often near the walls, touching them with gloved fingers, listening. "There is something beneath this place," he said before dawn. "Something older than the house, maybe older than the town." I thought of Elias's drawings, of the Tower of Eyes, the pit, the words carved into wood and flesh. The next morning, he asked for a spade. We found the crawl space beneath the house choked with roots. Thick, coiled things like veins petrified in the bark. They pushed through the soil like a second skeleton. The vicar worked in silence, digging where the roots were most dense. After nearly an hour, his shovel struck something hollow. Together, we cleared the dirt. It was a box. No, a coffin, no larger than a child's toy chest. Carved from dark wood warped by time. The hinges were corroded green, the surface etched with more of the same symbols that covered Elias's attic walls. One in particular, the eye surrounded by roots, had been scorched into the lid. The vicar stepped back, crossing himself with a hand that trembled. "It's not a coffin," he whispered. "It's a warning." Inside, we found a letter wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax long cracked. The paper was brittle, but the ink remained sharp, dated March 3rd, 1799. The handwriting was small, frantic. "To whomever finds this, do not remain. The thing beneath the land is not dead. We try to bury it in pieces, but it listens still. It speaks through the young. The ground drinks light. We could not kill it. We could only lull it to sleep. Burn the house. Salt the roots. Leave the boy behind." No name. No explanation. Just that. The vicar read it twice before folding it carefully into his coat. Then he stood and brushed the dirt from his knees. "There were rumors long before your family came," he said. "The original settlers found this valley. Quiet. Too quiet. They said the trees never lost their leaves, that the animals refused to nest here. The Abenaki avoided this land, called it Asilnak, the throat in the earth." Clara stood behind us, her face gray. "I should have listened to my mother," she murmured. "She always said the soil was too black for potatoes." The vicar left without blessing the house. He crossed the yard with his head down and did not look back. That night, the ground beneath the house throbbed. I felt it in my teeth. And in the attic above, Elias laughed, slow and low, as though he were dreaming of something vast and hungry rising through the earth to greet him. It was on the 12th night after the vicar left that I found Clara's journal lying open on the floor beside her chair. She had not come down for breakfast, nor lunch. I called for her, but there was no answer. When I climbed the stairs to her room, I found the door ajar and her bed untouched. The window was wide open despite the frost, and the curtains swayed like lungs with every breath of wind. There was no sign of her, just a journal, open to a page smeared with ink, as though her hand had trembled while writing. I picked it up and began to read. December 28th. The whispering keeps me awake. It comes not just from Elias now, but from the walls themselves. I pressed my ear to the floorboard and heard it beneath the house, scratching, as though nails dragged against stone in a slow, rhythmic pulse. I feel I am being watched, not by Elias, by the house. December 30th. He asked me to sing to him today, in his old voice. I almost wept, but then I saw his smile. It was wrong, too wide, too still. When I finished the lullaby, he whispered, "It's not yours anymore, but it remembers the tune." January 1st. I dreamt I gave birth to a seed. I was in the forest, the pines bowing over me like midwives. When I placed the seed into the soil, it pulsed once like a heartbeat, and then I heard it say my name in Elias's voice. I woke to find dirt in my bed sheets. January 2nd. I tried to write a letter to the doctor again, but when I held the pen, it snapped in half. My hands won't listen to me. They move without my will, scribbling symbols I do not know. One of them appeared on the mirror this morning, traced in condensation, and I inside a circle. I washed it away. It returned by nightfall. January 4th. I no longer believe he is sick. I believe he is becoming. Becoming what, I do not know. But there's a pattern, a purpose. He speaks to something that lives beneath us, something that was buried, not killed, and now it calls to him in return. The prayers no longer work. The crucifix above his door fell and split. January 5th. I heard my husband's voice last night. He's been dead 7 years. But the voice was his, soft, kind, full of sorrow. It told me to run. I tried. I opened the front door and stepped outside. The snow was black. January 6th. Elias no longer answers to his name. He hums when I call it. He repeats other names, ancient names, guttural and wet, like language turned to rot. I caught one in my mouth and bit my tongue. The blood tasted sweet. I swallowed. January 7th. The roots have reached the parlor. I hear them cracking the floorboards when it's quiet. They pulse in time with Elias's breathing. I think the house is growing. January 8th. I no longer sleep. I no longer dream. I stare into the darkness, and it stares back, and we have come to an understanding. My boy is gone. Something else wears his skin, speaks in his voice, mimics the shape of his sorrow, but there is nothing human left. January 9th, final entry. I kissed his forehead tonight. It was cold, not like death, but like something waiting to be born. He whispered, "The soil remembers." I think I understand now. He is not the first. He will not be the last. I am not afraid. Elias Hargrove. I closed the journal and looked to the window. The snow was falling again, thick, slow, unnatural. It swallowed sound, time, thought. Clara was gone. I did not know if she fled or if something in the house took her, but I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that she would not be found, and that whatever still lived behind that attic door was no longer waiting. It was preparing. By mid-January, Grantham had begun to rot, not suddenly but steadily, as if the roots beneath our home had reached out, winding their way through the soil like veins hungry for something more than blood. It began with the animals. The sheep at the Miller farm are found in a circle, their throats torn open but no blood on the snow. The dogs in town stopped barking altogether, then vanished within days. Horses refused to pass our road, bucking and biting their reins when brought too near. Then the crops turned. Winter wheat that had lasted years suddenly withered. Even the stores of dried food began to spoil, covered in a fine black mold that pulsed faintly in the dark. And always there was a silence. The wind stopped blowing. The trees no longer creaked. The pines had become statues, still, oppressive, watching. The townspeople began to leave, some in the dead of night. Wagons loaded with children and livestock, eyes down, mouths shut. Others left behind only footprints in the snow, and homes with front doors swinging open. I found one house, Mrs. Alder's, abandoned with a pot still boiling on the stove, the fire still warm. But not everyone escaped. Old Calhoun, who had once muttered warnings about Elias's silence, was found hanging from a tree behind the church, his body frozen stiff and his face turned toward the house. Not the sky, Not the church. Our house. Someone painted a symbol in ash across his chest before the sheriff could cut him down. The same symbol Elias had drawn over and over. The eye and the roots. The baker's youngest child fell ill. She spoke only in whispers. Began scratching at the floor with her teeth. She died after 3 days, mouth packed with soil. Her mother went mad. Father Marin tried to organize a prayer circle. Only 4 attended. The next day, the chapel burned to the ground. No one saw who lit it. No one asked. They only watched it smolder and turned away. The sheriff left without a word. By January 20th, the town of Grantham was nearly empty. No one answered knocks. No smoke rose from chimneys. No voices echoed across the snow. Just the trees, the stillness, and the feeling that something immense had uncoiled beneath our feet. I stayed. Why, I don't know. Maybe guilt. Maybe madness. Maybe because I knew, deep in the marrow of my bones, that leaving would not save me. It had already taken Clara. It had already claimed Elias. And it was spreading. Each night, the house grew darker. Not in light, but in spirit. The walls creaked like breath. The windows no longer reflected my image clearly. Sometimes, when I looked too long, I'd see another shape standing behind me. Tall, twisted, watching. Once, I saw footprints in the snow outside my window. Not human. Long, narrow, as if something with hooves or claws had been walking on 2 legs. They circled the house 3 times and then vanished. And the roots, those damned roots, they broke through the cellar wall by week's end. Twisting, pulsing, searching. I cut them back with a hatchet. They bled a thick, tar-colored sap that hissed when it touched the floor. I could feel Elias above me. He no longer paced. He waited. I could feel it through the boards, and the way of the house seemed to bend around his stillness, as though gravity had shifted, and he was now the center of it all. That night, I walked the town's edge. Every door was shut. Every face that peered through cracked windows looked away the moment our eyes met. The town wasn't just empty. It was forsaken. He arrived on the morning of January 24th, unannounced, riding a chestnut gelding and wearing a long gray coat dusted with city soot. He introduced himself as Professor Charles Elbridge, an associate of Harvard College, specializing in unusual psychological phenomena and colonial folklore. His tone was clipped, his manner direct. He claimed to have heard rumors from Concord and Boston, tales of a boy afflicted with catatonia, whispers of a cursed house, a superstitious town unraveling into hysteria. Such cases, he said, adjusting his gloves, are rarely as dramatic as the papers suggest. I didn't tell him that the papers hadn't been delivered in weeks, that there were no postmen left, that there was no town left. Clara's absence rattled him only slightly. He made a brief note in his leather-bound journal and asked if he could see Elias immediately. I warned him of the boy's state, the symbols, the voices, the cold, but he only smiled. I've studied the Bedlam journals, and I've observed trance cases in Providence. I assure you, I did not frighten easily. He slept in the parlor that night, near the fire. I offered him Clara's room, but he declined. I want to remain near the sounds, he said. His first entry, recorded that evening, read, January 24th. Subject appears to have undergone a profound psychological transformation. The symptoms suggest an amalgam of catalepsy, mutism, and dissociative identity, possibly trauma-induced. Family history unknown. Mother missing. Uncle unstable. I read that last part twice. On the second night, he climbed the attic stairs. I stood at the bottom, lantern in hand. The boy had been silent for days, but as Elbridge ascended, I felt the temperature drop sharply. He paused outside the door, notebook tucked beneath one arm, a brass stethoscope in the other. He knocked once. Elias. Silence. Elbridge, he announced calmly, I would like to ask you some questions. Then, from behind the door, so soft I nearly missed it, do you dream? The professor froze. He leaned closer. What did you say? Elias repeated the question, and then added, do you know what grows in your sleep? Elbridge stared at the door for a long moment. Then, without a word, He turned and came back down the stairs. That night, he didn't write in his journal. On the third day, I found him in the kitchen, staring at a spoon like it had spoken to him. The boy asked me something odd. He said, something metaphorical. Nothing Elias says is metaphor, I replied. He nodded slowly, then opened his notebook and scribbled frantically. January 26, subject is not in a trance, nor asleep. He is attentive. He watches. He listens. His knowledge of dead languages is extensive. He recited 3 full verses of Enochian last night. I do not know how he learned it. I do not know how he learned my name before I gave it. That evening, the professor asked to be left alone with the boy. I must observe him directly, he said. The symbols, the speech patterns, there's an emergent structure to all of this. A pattern, possibly pre-Indo-European, possibly older. I unlocked the attic and opened the door halfway. The cold that spilled out made my eyes water. Elbridge entered with a candle. The door shut behind him. I waited outside, listening. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then whispering, but not Elias. Elbridge's voice, speaking rapidly, in tongues, and then silence. When I opened the door, he was sitting in the far corner, eyes wide, candle extinguished. Elias stood behind him, expression blank. The professor was shaking. He would not speak for the rest of the night. In his final entry, scribbled hastily and torn at the edges, he wrote, January 27th. There is something here, in the house, in the walls. It is not the boy. It is what looks through him. It wants things. It remembers. It learns. There are symbols in the floorboards now. I don't remember carving them. They're my dreams. The roots reach everything. They are beneath me. I can feel them growing inside my mouth. The boy told me. The soil remembers. He was not speaking to me. By morning, Elbridge was gone. His coat still hung by the door. His satchel remained by the fire. The front door stood wide open. Snow led away from the house, bare footprints stretching into the woods. I never saw him again, but days later, I found one last page tucked into his journal. A drawing, a tower made of roots. At the top, a mouth. At the bottom, a pit, and beside it, written in a hand I barely recognized, "We do not sleep because it dreams." For days after Elbridge vanished, I didn't speak, not to Elias, not to myself, not even to the wind, which had finally returned, howling through the eaves like a voice long held captive. The professor's belongings remained where he had left them, his coat, his satchel, his notes scattered like bones across the parlor floor. I gathered them slowly, flipping to the half-formed theories, the fevered annotations, the sketches that grew more abstract and grotesque the deeper into the journal I read. There were diagrams of roots spiraling around human spines, cross-sections of brains overgrown with what he labeled as cognitive moss. One phrase repeated across multiple pages, in different hands, his own Clara's, and once of my own, though I had no memory of writing it. The soil remembers. On the fourth day, I laid the journal side by side, Elbridge's, Clara's, and my own sparse notes. I no longer cared whether I understood. I simply wanted to see the shape of it, whatever it was, the pattern hidden beneath the language, the sickness that was not a sickness, the drawings all aligned, the eye and the roots, the pit of mouths, the spiral tower, each rendered by a different hand, yet identical. This wasn't madness. This wasn't illness. This was transmission, a contagion of thought, passed like pollen in the air or spores in the blood. Something breathed in, spoken aloud, remembered by soil and shape alike. Elias wasn't possessed. He had been planted, and something inside him had taken root. The realization came not with a scream or a gasp, but a whisper in the stillness. He was never sick. He was never changing. He was always becoming. Something had called to him, not from the attic, not from the woods, but from beneath, from a depth that is no measure, from a place where things older than time dream in silence, waiting for the right voice, the right vessel, the right soil. Elias had simply listened, and something answered. I wrote it all down, every connection, every observation. I penned a letter to the nearest provincial university. I gathered professors' journals and Clara's final pages, sealed them in a tin box, and carried them to the sheriff's post office, one of the few buildings still intact. The deputy there, what was left of him, was too far gone to argue. He accepted the parcel with glassy eyes and tucked it beneath the desk. He did not speak. He did not blink. I watched the flame before I smelled the smoke. The building went up like dry timber, the fire surging unnaturally high and hot, cracking stone and boiling the snow in fat clouds of steam. I staggered back into the street, choking, watching the roof collapse. No one came to help. No one screamed. The tin box never reappeared. Every page, every sketch, every word, gone, burned, erased. That night, I returned to the house and stood before the attic door. It was quiet now. Elias hadn't made a sound in 2 days. I pressed my hand to the wood. It was warm, not like fire, like breath. I no longer feared what he would say. I feared what he remembered, what he had always remembered. I found one last note tucked beneath the professor's coat. It was a torn scrap, hastily written in smeared graphite. No date, no salutation, only one sentence. He was not a child. He was a root disguised as a boy. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I waited, and the house breathed with me. I burned the house on a moonless night. I made no preparations beyond what instinct told me. I didn't pray. I didn't write a will. I left no note behind, because there was no one left in Grantham to read it. The town had emptied like lungs exhaling their final breath. No wagons passed, no crows called. The snow had stopped falling, but the air remained heavy, dense with the echo of everything that had once lived there. I started in the cellar. The roots had split the stone by then, thick tendrils pulsing beneath the foundation, like veins too swollen to hide. I poured kerosene along the cracks, watching the liquid vanish into the dark. I soaked the wooden beams, the stairs, the walls. Every floorboard groaned beneath me, like a final protest. The house was old, dry, hungry for fire. It should have burned fast. Should have gone up like tinder and ended in ash. I saved the attic for last. I didn't unlock the door. I didn't need to. The silence behind it told me everything I needed to know. Elias hadn't spoken in days, not aloud. But I felt his attention through the walls, a silent pulse that beat just out of rhythm with my own. I pressed my palm to the door and whispered his name one last time. No answer, no movement, only warmth. Not fire warmth, breath. The sense of something alive on the other side, too still, too ancient to stir. I descended to the parlor and lit the first match with shaking hands. It flared bright, warm, ordinary, human. I dropped it onto the soaked floor and stepped back, waiting to see the flames consume the home where my sister had vanished, where my nephew had become something unspeakable, where the roots had crawled through time and soil alike. The fire caught. It hissed and roared. The walls shrieked as beams cracked and paint peeled. For a moment, I believed I had done it, that the nightmare would end in smoke. But then the flames reached the attic door and stopped. They didn't die with a hiss or explode with force. They simply recoiled, pulled back into themselves like a breath reversed, shrinking inward, shrinking down. The fire collapsing on itself, not extinguished but consumed. Drawn into the house like light into a black well. The kerosene vanished. The smoke fell instead of rising. The ash was swallowed. I stood outside in the snow, jaw clenched, eyes wide, staring as the fire failed to do the one thing it was meant to do. The house stood, dark, quiet, unburned. And then from the attic window, the curtain shifted. Elias stood there, or what remained of him. His face had changed. Too pale, too still. The eyes were no longer Elias's. They were older, glacier, full of memory. He didn't look angry, didn't look triumphant, just aware, like something newly awake after a long, dreamless sleep. I ran that night. I didn't pack, didn't look back. I walked for 3 days without sleep, eating snow, chewing bark, following the stars until I found the edge of a road that still led somewhere. Somehow, I made it to civilization, to Boston, to sanity. I told no one. Who would believe it? Even now, decades later, I'm not sure I believe it myself. But the house still stands. I read about it first in a 19th century pamphlet on New England folk oddities. A brief paragraph under the heading, The Black Root House of Grantham, mentioned a structure that had resisted fire and weather for over 20 years. The author claimed it was cursed, that families who moved near it suffered from hallucinations, infertility, and madness. One child was said to have grown an extra set of teeth, upside down. In 1863, a demolition crew was sent to tear it down. None returned. Their cart was found a week later, its horses dead, eyes missing. One axe lay in the snow, its handle bent backward. No bodies were recovered. In 1871, lightning struck the house during a summer storm. The neighbors claimed they saw the roof ignite. For 5 minutes, fire licked the shingles. Then silence. When they approached, the fire was gone. Not a mark remained. One man stepped onto the porch. He came back weeping, unable to speak. He hanged himself 3 days later. His suicide note contained only one phrase. It blinked. By 1890, state officials declared the property condemned. They fenced it off, posted warnings, tried to erase Grantham from the records. But people remembered. The house became a dare. Teenagers from nearby towns would sneak past the gates, brag about touching the doorknob, carving initials into the porch rail. Some didn't come back. Those who did were changed. One boy, Henry Leland, came home barefoot, clothes torn, lips blue. He never spoke again. Not a single word for 27 years. His wife said he would lie awake every night, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mouthing the same phrase over and over. Elias Hargrove. They say the land around the house stopped growing grass, that no birds fly overhead, that compasses spin when held near the porch. They say a surveyor tried to redraw the property line and vanished for 2 weeks. When he reappeared, he was naked, covered in symbols carved into his skin with something dull. He couldn't remember his own name, but he could draw the house perfectly. Shingles, steps, attic window. And always in that window, a figure. Today, the land is overgrown, but the structure remains intact. Locals say it hums on certain nights, especially after storms. A low, pulsing sound, like a choir singing underground. No one has touched it in decades. The state has sealed the road with concrete barriers and posted armed guards twice a year to check for trespassers. One guard went missing in 1928, another in 1951. The third was found sleeping beside the foundation, curled like a fetus, whispering to roots poking from beneath the earth. The report classified it as environmental delirium. The file was later destroyed in a fire that consumed the local archive. Of course, I am an old man now. My hands shake when I write. My voice is frail. But some nights, when I sleep long enough, I dream of that attic. I dream of Elias, of the warmth behind the door, of the thing that was never a boy. And when I wake, I sometimes find dirt beneath my fingernails, roots pressed against my window, and the whisper of a house that refused to fall, because it was never a house. It was a womb, and it's still waiting. I first heard the name Grantham in a forgotten podcast episode from a defunct paranormal radio show, one of those late-night programs where callers whisper about shadow people and cursed VHS tapes. The host had mentioned a town in Vermont that no longer appeared on modern maps, a place where the houses vanished, but one structure still stood. He called it the house that refused to fall. I dismissed it at first, until I found the phonograph. I'm a researcher, not in the academic sense, but the obsessed kind. My apartment is filled with reels, lost recordings, and warped cassette tapes found in yard sales and condemned basements. I catalog strange sounds. I digitize forbidden things. This particular phonograph came from a fire sale at a closed-down antique shop in Concord. I wasn't supposed to be there. The building had been tagged for demolition, but a friend of a friend let me in after hours. Said I might find one of those creepy little projects I love so much. I found it under a tarp in the back room, a hand-cranked phonograph, dusty but intact. Inside the case, wrapped in wax paper, was a single record, No label, just black shellac etched with faint grooves. It smelled like wet soil. When I played it that night, I expected warble and static. I didn't expect a voice. The recording began with hiss. Normal at first, surface noise and crackle. Then came the hum, not electrical, organic, a deep, rhythmic vibration that pulsed through my speakers like breath through a lung the size of a house. It grew louder for a moment, then faded, like something moving past, brushing against a microphone, and then a child's voice. "Do you hear it?" The voice was male, young, barely above a whisper. "Do you feel it?" There was a pause. Then something impossible. The boy said my name. Not my username. Not a nickname. My birth name. One I haven't used online. One I haven't spoken aloud in years. I stopped the phonograph. Checked the record. No markings. No labels. No reason for this. I turned it back on. The voice continued as if nothing had interrupted it. "It remembers you," he said. "The soil remembers everything." Then came the chanting. Soft at first. Wet, glottal syllables like stones rolling in a mouth. "A.S. Toravinilf. A.S. Toravinilf. A.S. Toravinilf." The background static began to twist, taking on a rhythm, a pattern that made my teeth ache. A warbling distortion, like roots curling through a throat. Then, beneath the chant, came other voices. Dozens. Hundreds. Some whispering. Some weeping. Some laughing in slow, guttural hiccups. A layered chorus of things that were not human. Speaking from below. The pitch dropped. The voice, Elias's voice, spoke again. Only this time, it wasn't his voice. It was lower, older, a voice like stone cracking beneath centuries of weight. "We do not sleep because it dreams," it said. "And now that you've listened," a burst of static cut through the message. And then I heard something that has kept me awake every night since. A recording of my voice. Breathing, not speaking, just breathing. And then very faintly it whispered, "You brought it home." I haven't been the same since. Every device in my apartment malfunctions. The lights dim when I play the file. There's soil in my bathtub every morning. My dreams are different now. I dream of a house I've never seen, yet know too well. A tall structure wrapped in roots, with an attic window that watches, always watches. I dream of a boy standing there, motionless, lips stitched closed with pine needles. But the worst part? He isn't always alone. There's something behind him. Tall, motionless, waiting. And in the mornings, my voice is hoarse. My throat raw, like I've been chanting all night. I tried to destroy the record. I shattered it into 10 pieces and buried them across the city. 3 days later, it was back on my desk. Whole, clean, waiting. Last night, I recorded new audio on my phone, just silence, or so I thought. When I play it back, I heard the attic door creak open. Footsteps, bare feet, slow, deliberate, a breath against the microphone. And then, once again, Elias's voice. "You shouldn't have listened. But now that you have, you will carry it with you, and you will plant it in them. Like a root, like a seed, like me. I don't know how much longer I'll be myself. Sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in mirrors that don't match mine. Sometimes I wake with dirt under my nails, or blood on my sheets that isn't mine. And now, tonight, there's something worse. A knock at my door, soft, rhythmic, and on the other side, I hear a child's voice whispering a name. Not mine, yours.